Snow at Heaven's Edge, Chapter 16. Dusk lingered longer than expected, lending a touch of amber to the dreary gray sky. Lin Wuai stared at it while drinking his tea and eating the few dishes he had prepared. He could sense disquietude permeating his being. It was like watching a drop of ink blot a sheet of perfect white. Reflecting on the morning's battle with Tang Ming, he thought of an old saying: "Of all things, none clings more fastidiously than evil deeds, evil karma." Was this what drew foes to him? The spirit of countless men who died under his blade. He recalled the dismantling of the White Sword Sect, the Battle of Red Plains, and the countless other fights large and small. In each, he fought for his beliefs and had hopes of a better tomorrow. Men like Huang Yongjie needed his sword to effect such changes, and he was more than willing to become the man's blade. Lin Wuai had no remorse and would do the same 1,000,000 times over. Some men were beyond redemption, and only death could bring release and halt the cycle of destruction and devastation that these individuals bring. In this northern border town, seemingly quiet and far from political strife and pugilistic conflicts, peace was still only a mirage. A deep history of violence and cruelty was already in existence. Lin Wuai drew a long face, and his heart grew heavy. He admired the wisdom of the Enlightened One, even more as he now wholeheartedly saw the truth in the phrase, "Sentient beings are infinite, and even through countless lifetimes, never will they all be freed." In the same vein, that truth made the Bodhisattva's vow all the grander. "How can I, Lin Wuai, compare?" he said aloud. Snow drifted from the rooftops, and the humbled man stared at the empty streets, hoping to see Li Xiang. A duel with Wu Tianxue was inevitable. Like Tang Ming, Wu Tianxue fixated on him, the perceived strongest of Tianya Inn's occupants. The outcome of this battle, however, would be bloody. The man's nonchalance toward life, penchant for cruelty, and vacant aura bothered him, for bloodshed would follow Wu Tianxue into the Central Plains. Lin Wuai needed his sword. He reread the journal and recalled the encounter with the pale-faced man. Had the fight gone on longer, he would have lost. A lengthy duel was to his disadvantage, but Wu Tianxue's defense was too good for him to establish dominance early and end it. He sighed and stared into the darkening horizon, waiting for the men to come. Qinghe rattled in Xiaoyan's arms. There was no doubt she returned for me. They both did. A constant stream of warm, salty tears rolled down her cheeks as a long, dormant feeling stirred in her bosom. She shook, afraid to love or be loved. She could not face the prospect of losing someone again. Hate was much easier, safer. As she ran, her muscles ached and her lungs were ablaze. Still, Feng Xian refused to stop. Her mind continued to assault her with images of a dead Lin Ruting and a dying Li Xiang. Her body demanded she stop. She coughed up blood from breathing too rapidly and deeply in such cold. The lack of air made her muscles tenser than before as they twisted into tight, painful knots. The sun was quite low and nearly gone, and long, dark shadows stretched across the land. She spotted light from a campfire. When she neared, Xiaoyan saw Lin Ruting tied and leashed like an animal. Bruises adorned the woman's face and blood from her wounds stained her clothes. Her captor was pacing about mumbling something wholly inaudible from Xiaoyan's distance. Rutingjie occasionally nodded or looked at him as if to acknowledge what he had said. Movement in the background to her left stole her attention from the spectacle. She strained hard in the dark to detect what it was until it moved again. The shadow was diminutive. Xiaoyan squinted harder and saw that it was waving, beckoning her. A fox spirit? Forest imp? She tried to stay very still, but the figure kept gesturing. Finally, it stopped, but now a deeper dark had set in that completely obfuscated the outline of the shadow. Panic nearly overcame Xiaoyan as she thought of a way to stay hidden. Should she run? She lay flat against the ground, hoping that what she had seen was her imagination. "It's me," a soft whisper sounded just to her right. Feng Xian's heart nearly exploded, and she almost screamed when the shape closed in and pressed its small hand against her mouth. "It's you!" Xiaoyan wanted to say, but Li Xiang had read it in her eyes and nodded. Slowly, she released her hand and pointed. "That is the third time I talk about the principle of righteousness and extol the true meaning of sacrifice. Do you not understand, or are you not convinced?" Fang Kai asked louder this time so that they could hear. He was annoyed and impatient. "Do you harbor doubts as well, or do you too question it?" Lin Ruting replied. Nonsense. The first rule of the White Sword sect is faith. Obey the rules and trust in it, he sighed. Perhaps I am too impatient to expect someone drenched in the impurities of unscrupulous morals and undisciplined behaviors of the common way to grasp the higher concepts of our institution. Much like the sword stance you employ, too bastardized compared to the pure stance of our swordplay. That is why you lost. He tugged on the rope, forcing Lin Ruting to lower her head as if in prostration, and laughed. Li Xiang whispered to Xiaoyan that the man would lecture again, and he indeed began anew. While the older girl fumed, Li Xiang smiled. "What are you smiling at?" whispered Xiaoyan. "Ruting Jie is recovering." Li Xiang saw the sword in Xiaoyan's hand. "Where did you—" An awkwardness seized her faculties, and Feng Xiaoyan looked away, but the girl lost interest. "We need to get the sword to Ruting Jie." "How?" "It's my turn," the girl said as she got up. "Wait, where are you going?" "Play hero, of course. You have the sword. Besides, if the old bastard sees you, he'll kill you. He won't do that to me. I'm his pupil." She smiled mischievously and disappeared into the night. The man had finally stopped lecturing. He stared at his prisoner intently and decided to reel her in like a fish by pulling on the leash. "I see why the lecherous demon, Lin Wuai, would be interested in you. Many men are. You are rather beautiful." "Do not insult Wuai Gege," she spat. His hand rose, ready to fall, but did not. The sound of fast footfalls and snow quickly got the man to his feet. "Who is it?" "Coward! If you're a true warrior, come and face me." The footsteps quickened. Fan Kai stared in the direction of the sound and sped into the dark. A few heartbeats later, Feng Xianran tumbled toward Lin Ruting, who was surprised to see her return. When Ruting's eyes fell on Qinghe, she was even more surprised. Xiaoyan swiftly parted the rough hemp with a sharp blade and handed it to Ruting. "This ends tonight," she said, and darted after her tormentor. Fan Kai had overtaken Li Xiang. The two stood face to face. "Is it really you?" he asked, stuttering slightly from joy. He found it hard to focus as his heart thumped violently against his chest. What a day. "You shameless scum," Li Xiang shouted. "You call yourself a hero, a senior in the martial realm, stooping to the level of hostage-taking. Regardless, little girl, you're coming with me." He reached for the girl. A glint of blue hit his eyes, and he retracted his hand as the blade swished through the air. "You ingrate!" he yelled, and slashed at the young woman in rapid succession. Lin Ruting blocked, parried, and continued to back away, adopting a defensive approach to conserve energy. Her path to victory lay in one move. She waited for an opportunity as she absorbed multiple offensive barrages. Blood dripped from her mouth as she disengaged from the fight with labored breaths and dropped to one knee. "This time, I'm going to sever your tendons," Fan Kai threatened. "That way, all you can do is crawl." He pulled his arm back, readying for a vicious cut, when Lin Ruting shot from her kneeling position. Fan Kai could only shift aside to mitigate the attack, but it was too late. A long slash decorated his abdomen and up across his left arm. He reeled back and had to balance himself with his sword. Lin Ruting spat out a mouthful of blood. Fan Kai pressed a hand to his wound and attempted to rise, but Feng Xiaoyan emerged from the dark and dived for his legs. He attempted to slash at the girl, but Li Xiang also threw herself at him and clung to his good arm, wrapping her legs around it like vines. She unsheathed her dagger and plunged it into his shoulder. All three collapsed to the ground. "You bitch!" Fan Kai got to his knees and grabbed Li Xiang with his left hand. He glanced down at his chest with a surprised and curious expression. Qinghe protruded from it, and he opened his mouth as if to say something, but a torrent of blood poured forth. When the sword left his body, he twisted and then fell for a final time. "Go to hell and tell them about me," Lin Ruting said, and sheathed her sword. Feng Xiaoyan and Li Xiang gathered around her, and the three embraced. "We must go and return to the others." A harrowing cry deep in the night punctuated her statement, and they set off to seek safety in numbers, even if that were just an illusion. Screams continued sporadically throughout the night. A small group of villagers huddled around Tang Ming and Ma Xianda. Both men were relieved that Wei Qingren and his party had sagged behind to pillage the dead. Remembering Lin Wuai's words, Tang Ming kept a watchful eye on Miao Dan. Snow owls hooted in the dark, calling for lost souls. Ming and Xianda were quick to arms when they heard approaching footfalls. Their apprehension turned to elation when they saw the familiar faces. Through the faint moonlight, Chen Daming noticed the jade pendant hanging from Xiaoyan's sash and ripped it from her. This! Where did you get it? Feng Xiaoyan was at a loss for words. She took the pendant with the intent to insult and wound the innkeeper. Even her theft of Qinghe was an act of vengeance. She had prepared for the violence and the deaths to come. What she did not expect was her own reaction to them. Bodies stripped of life and dignity littered the paths. Children clutched tightly to their parents and shivered from more than just the cold. Their incessant tears flowed for their lost parents, siblings, and friends. The elders, ones who chided and beat her, stared vacantly at their dead loved ones. She could tell from their eyes that they too were dead. Her fiery ire was quenched today, extinguished even, for in every pair of watery eyes held a reflection of her own immeasurable grief. Her enemies and their past wrongs blurred, but the pain and deaths laid before her were vividly clear. The dark monsters she had awakened oozed out of her through her tears. She felt Lin Ruting's arm around her shoulder, and Feng Xiangyan saw the beautiful woman's face, swelling slightly from the bruises, looked at her with a gentle, compassionate expression. She realized at that moment what she wanted was happiness. She repeated the events leading to her finding Xing'er's body, but spared the innkeeper the details of its condition. Chen Daming howled and grieved, but no one cared nor turned a head his way. They all had their pain and loss, and he was just one of many. The ramifications of the stolen blade wore on her, despite Lin Ruting's consolation. Lin Wuai would have stayed behind regardless of Xiaoyan's actions, because that was the only way to draw Wu Tianxue away from the group. The ambush was going to happen whether Xiaoyan took the sword or not. Qinghe was better here, where it can prevent more loss of lives. None of these medicating words reached the sore that festered deep within Feng Xiaoyan's soul. She stared blankly at the mass of grieving people, and her eyes fell on Miao Dan. Events of the past returned to her, and Feng Xiaoyan raised a finger and shouted, "Him! It's him!" Like the morning sun dispersing the fog, the revelation cleared Chen Daming's sight as well. "You promised he would be returned!" The innkeeper lunged at the old storyteller, but Miao Dan avoided the blow with surprising dexterity and flipped the younger man onto the ground several feet away. With a leap and a bound, Miao Dan was gone. Chen Daming told his tale of betrayal. He only had enough muscle relaxant to use on those who mattered, the government troops and Lin Ruting. The crowd listened, and they offered no sympathy for the traitor. Some spat at his feet, while others turned away. Most just stared vacantly, or with fire in their eyes. He was waiting for his people to come, but then you left. The men, they... He choked on the words and looked embarrassed. "Wanted you." "Despicable," Pao Xiang yelled. But Lin Ruting remained calm. The condition grew more precarious. She had hoped for a resolution of Miao Dan's situation under a more contained environment. The spies returned to the bandit group would likely trigger an imminent attack. She recalled the image of Feng Xiaoyan in the middle of the frozen pond. No matter whichever way she moved, she could hear the ice crackling. Multiple braziers kept the large reception hall warm, and rows of candles lit it. Lin Wuai studied the various names on the famed wall. His mind recalled the more prominent ones and wondered where such heroes were now. Were they buried deep within the earth, or did they have their ashes scattered across the four oceans? The end awaited them all. This endless cycle of life, suffering, and death was constant. "This is Tao," a Taoist priest would say. "This is the noble truth," a Buddhist monk would say. Was human effort really in vain? The more he saw the truth, the more he fought, and the more he realized about the unchanging nature of it. Lin Wuai recalled a phrase etched upon the stone of humanity on the foothills of Shaolin Mountains. "Gladly would I have my skin, bone, and sinews wither, and my flesh dried up, if only I can struggle until I win that which can be won by human effort." Those immortal words had inspired him countless times before. But now? He felt like a man tasked with emptying the waters of an ocean with a pot. Was it the deficiency of the pot or the vastness of the ocean? He picked up the sound of approaching footfalls, soft as they were. "Welcome," he said, as if to a friend. A cold, indifferent air penetrated the empty room as the doors opened and then closed again. Wu Tianxue noticed the 2 teacups on the table. "It's for the fated encounter," Wuai said. "I believe in destiny also. Our beliefs are rather different." "That is true. There is always right and wrong to separate us. What makes one right and wrong? Wuai asked. The proper way of the sword can only be shown. You are confident that the proper way would be victorious. Like the truth that philosophers seek, there can be only one. Singularity of mind, singularity of way, singularity of faith. Thus the sect cannot have two leaders. A curious look showed on Wu Tianxue's rather stoic face. The most of the expression came from his eyes, which showed surprise and annoyance. Lin Wuai said nothing but indulged in the response. Wu Tianxue broke the silence with a slight wry smile. Exactly. Then I wonder who the right one is. The one who lives. Lin Wuai laughed. You're right. The winner is king and the loser a villain. You are rather interesting. Too bad the world cannot accommodate us both. Why is that? Wu Tianxue asked. Because you cannot accommodate me. I think so. Do you think you can? Yes, but it won't work out. For the same reason? For the same reason. Lin Wuai studied his opponent, watching closely to the rise and fall of his chest and listened attentively to the muffled beating of his heart. Both were long and drawn. The strange, ageless face, the unconventional defensive tactics, and inexplicable amplification of power as the fight wore on were pieces of a puzzle that started to come together. Before I missed the opportunity, Wu Tianxue said apathetically, I'd like to know how many people you've killed before. I do not keep count. None. That is what I would have said before. But of course, I know that level of swordsmanship is not achieved through practice alone. That is why I say you make a great assassin. To be a great assassin, one would have to hold death in one's sleeves and hatred in one's heart. I am much too casual for serious work. Not everyone is capable of ambitious undertakings, Wu Tianxue retorted. Mismatch between ambition and talent is a common source of human suffering and sorrow. Suffering allows one to transcend the ordinary and cast off the common. Wu Tianxue's hands tensed slightly as he said it, while his voice sounded more passionate than in any of his previous statements. Lin Wuai was not surprised. The notion of being wronged and the desire to seek retribution was a strong emotion. I see, you must have been wronged. Wronged? All these years I lived without ever beholding day under the floors of the fortress. But the heavens have eyes, and the great saint would never allow his true successor to suffer unjustly. One snowstorm was all it needed to blanch the fortress out forever. Were you captured or tricked into the fortress prison? Wu Tianxue tried to answer, but his pride would not allow it. He merely buried his anguish. Scoundrels! Cowards! Lin Wuai lifted the cup to his lips and poured his smile into his stomach. The longest night started when Wei Qingren and a handful of men, bloodied and tired, caught up to the remaining villagers. The small amount of toxin lasted 6 precarious hours. He used that time to strip, search, and loot the corpses of the fallen. The macabre task prompted an idea within him. I need you all to strip, the general declared. Numb from the cold and hardened from the brush with death, the villagers faced this new threat with indifference, but the general was in a foul mood. He had enough of the north, and wished nothing more than to finish his mission and return to the central plains. He skewered the nearest villager. Lin Ruting had awoken to the screams of the surprised and shocked villagers. The scene before her needed no exposition. This is humanity in its most vile form. Tang Ming and the general yelled at one another, and Ma Xianda, with his obligation to Lin Ruting completed, would have attacked Lionhead Wei had it not been for Ma Wunyang's increasingly frantic behavior. Do not forget who you are, little pup, Wei Qingren mocked. I have not. My role is to protect the people, not terrorize them. Otherwise, you're no better than those white-clad men, Tang Ming responded. Those men are criminals, men who are destined to rot away in this frozen hell. That is your fate as well. And these people, the bushy-bearded man said as he met Ma Xianda's stern gaze, have long been condemned. It was luck that spared them for so long. If you don't wish to join them, I suggest that you assist us. Mama, they're back, a little boy yelled. The constant alertness drained everyone's mental acuity. The soldiers were especially vulnerable and grew testy. Spears pointed left and right, and the unit fell into disarray, trying to locate their enemy. The white-clads changed their tactic after the morning's battle. They went after women and children, plucking them like flowers and absconding with their prize. The The more beautiful ones, such as the ladies from the Spring Flower Pavilion, became a valuable prey. General Wei ordered his men into a defensive formation after realizing they were not the intended target. If the messenger were slain or taken, he would have accomplished his mission. Why not let these lunatics do his job for him? Pao Xiang screamed at her fellow sisters to seek safety behind Lin Ruting, Tang Ming, and Ma Xiande. A cold hand fell on her shoulder and lifted her, but a sharp blast of cold whistled past her ear and the pressure eased. She fell. Pao Xiang stood dumbfounded for a moment. Blood drenched her shoulder, and a severed hand lay several feet away. Her bag. She had it around her shoulder. She looked frantically for it amidst the carnage. 15 feet from where she stood lay the bag. A small parcel spilled halfway out, and it sparkled like gold in the dim light of night. Pao Xiang wanted to retrieve it, but her body refused to obey. Her limbs trembled and her world spun. She looked around for help, but saw that none were forthcoming. Tang Ming darted this way and that to disrupt the offensive strategy of the attackers. Ma Xiande was forced into a tight situation, being flanked by 2 attackers. Only Lin Ruting had modest success as she retreated up a tiny hill with several women, children, and her companions. The incline was steep and helped limit the speed and power of the men's charge. Pao Xiang had only herself. She had to retrieve the bag. The hope of a better tomorrow lay within its contents. If she lost it, then all she had done was in vain, and all that would be left of the future was the past. Live or die, she had to fulfill her obligation to the people. Pao Xiang pushed through the crowd and evaded the melee around her. 15 feet felt like 15 miles. She stopped several times to duck swinging sabers and thrusting spears. When she rose after ducking another errant attack, she saw Wei Qingren standing over the package and picked it up. He grasped the knotted handle of the silk bag like a hunter its prey. Her heart sank, but she was far from despair. If she waited, she knew opportunities would arise. What she did not expect was how soon it came. Wei Qingren was about to walk away with the prize when a blur of white floated his way. A kick to his wrist sent the bag flying. He thrust his spear at the attacker, who evaded it by leaping backwards, clearing enough space for Lionhead Wei to jump for the packet. A hand grasped at his leg and yanked him back to the ground. As the bag fell, the nimble movements of the white-clad warrior prevented Wei Qingren from gaining position. The general swung his weapon to clear space to no avail. The white-clad warrior reappeared as soon as the weapon cleared its arc. He thrust at the man who kicked it off course. The second kick sent the coveted prize away from both men. Like a rabbit emerging from its burrow, Pao Xiang raced for the bag and snatched it from where it had fallen. The men were still fighting. Lionhead Wei was no match for his opponent. The white-clad attacker sent the general flying back with multiple kicks to his torso. At the man's approach, Wei Qingren dug his spear into the ground and shoveled up a pile of snow and dirt at the man's face to cover his retreat. The white-clad man stood motionless for a long while, taking in the slaughter as a farmer surveying his harvest. He turned and his eyes met hers. "You!" Pao Xiang backed away, hugging tightly to the bag. Maid dungeons were notorious for their inhumane treatment of prisoners. Could it be more than violent cruelty that resulted in mutilated bodies across town? Cannibalism was not an unheard of response to starvation. Perhaps these men, looking at Wu Tianxue, however, made him rethink his theory. No, there was definitely violence and cruelty. The fate of a dynasty is easy to change. The character of a man is hard to alter. Lin Wuai did not feel nervous at all. On the contrary, a wave of calm washed over his body, and the winter wind felt free and refreshing. Time began to slow for him, and he wondered how he had forgotten the feel of a normal sword. He was barely 14 when he last held a blade other than Xinghe. He looked at Wu Tianxue, the man staring apathetically at him from the opposite rooftop with sudden sadness. The man was dead. Lin Wuai could see it happening, though he knew not how to defeat him yet. With Wu Tianxue and others like him, who held to a singular belief adamantly, they became short-sighted, and possibilities closed before them. As the end stroke of a sword carried no power, the blind faith of these men gave them no sustenance. Their fanaticism was dangerous and poisonous to themselves and others because singularity was extremism, absolute and domineering. It was confining in nature, limited in utility, and discriminatory in practice. In contrast, the goal of moderation was to understand and explore. It was open in nature, endless in function, and inclusive in practice. The proper way was in theory the pinnacle of the sword art, personified by the sword saint, who handed the instructions for the white sword sect disciples to practice this perfect style of swordsmanship. Lin Wuai understood differently and viewed the zenith of swordsmanship as dynamic. He was a man who preferred to pursue perfection rather than to worship it. As the swords clashed, Lin Wuai could feel the unrestrained power behind Wu Tianxue's blade. He shifted the angle of impact and guided it away. The blade in his hand shook like a leaf in the wind, and he could see sections where the edge rolled over. It would not hold for long. He unleashed several quick cuts, more to clear space than to inflict serious damage. Lin Wuai used the time to adjust his stance and focus his chi, directing it toward his blade hand for a new tactic. When he attacked again, he alternated between short, fast strokes and slower but powerful strikes. The rhythm change and pattern breaking aimed to confuse Wu Tianxue's defense. The impact of the blade sent waves of chi rippling from the epicenter of the fight, shattering tiles and shedding roofing. Wu Tianxue held his position. He took a step back to feign a retreat, and in the same motion gathered momentum for his attack. The thrusts came fast and left his opponent no room or space to parry. In desperation and a show of skill, Lin Wuai turned his blade and blocked the tip of Wu Tianxue's sword with the spine of his. The impact sent him reeling. His sword, inferior to begin with, shattered in two. He would have fell off the rooftop had he not backflipped onto another. Lin Wuai landed on one knee and with a loud thump, breaking the tiles around him. He took a deep breath and immediately spat blood. The pale-faced man's power had increased since the battle began. Had Wu Tianxue purposely held back his strength, or was he drawing power from somewhere? Wu Tianxue gave him no time to think. The man's sword came simultaneously for his throat and heart. Such speed, Lin Wuai tossed the broken blade at his opponent and moved off the center line to evade the attack. Wu Tianxue swung again, channeling even more power to his sword. Wu Wai pivoted, but the sword came at him again and again at different angles, forcing him to leap backwards and yield space. The pale-faced man thrust once more. Wu Wai caught the blade between his palms, one slightly extended and the other closely flexed near his body. He let the palm closest to him drop slightly, freeing the blade while his furthest hand pushed it away, opening enough room for him to send a vertical chop at the man's face. But Wu Tianxue moved equally fast and leapt away. Lin Wuai would not let up. He followed with a flurry of kicks and palm strikes to the man's head and chest. Wu Tianxue slipped, pivoted, and blocked the kick, but the power of the attack forced him back several feet. "Just as I imagined," Wu Tianxue said dryly. "You haven't disappointed." Lin Wuai was not as hasty with his judgment. He had yet to fully appreciate the extent of his adversary's power, and it troubled him. His muscles started to ache, and he breathed harder, faster, all of which contrasted sharply to Wu Tianxue's utter ease. "After you, the Central Plains," the man said as he opened up another stance. The round proceeded much the same without a clear victor. Lin Wuai worked feverishly to complete the martial puzzle of Wu Tianxue's swordsmanship. The pale-faced man had fought Wei Qingren, Ruting, and now him. Were they merely tools to gauge his chance of success in the Central Plains? Wu Tianxue shot forward like an arrow. Lin Wuai jumped to the empty street below to evade the attack. The fight became a hunt. The face was oatmeal Dan's, but the tall, thin form and the large, youthful hands all belonged to someone else. "What is in that package?" he asked. The chaotic surrounding suddenly quieted, and Meldan spoke again. "Hand it over." The attackers and the villagers reshuffled. The white-clad bandits had a new target, and Piaoxiang felt every pair of eyes on her. The men, aligned in their straight line, began to fan out and converged on their prize. Tao Ming saw the danger and looked to Lin Ruting and Ma Xiande for help. Ruting pointed her blade towards the ground, and the other two copied her stance. When the bandits closed within striking distance, she gave the signal to attack. All three channeled chi into their sword and simultaneously struck the ground, raising a wall of snow that crashed onto the attackers. "Everyone, run!" Tao Ming shouted. Like insects under a newly uncovered rock, the people scattered every which way. Lin Ruting tried to protect as many people as possible while caring for her two younger charges and nursing her still fresh injuries. Piaoxiang blended with the crowd, which offered little protection as the attackers started slicing their way through. Sounds of death trailed her as she ran faster and faster, but never quite outpacing the carnage. Piaoxiang took a detour westward, and many of her sisters followed her. Her goal was to reach the large cave on the mountainous range where they could rest and recover for the final leg of the journey. Ma Xiande and his wife were amongst those that took this detour. Along the way, Lin Ruting and her small group joined them. Only 33 people remained when they reached the cavern. The rest had either scattered or died. "Lady Lin, Brother Ma and I shall guard the entrance. Please, rest your wounds," Tao Ming said. Lin Ruting nodded and walked out of the cave. The moonlight gave the ground a cool, bluish-white tint that reflected the woman's mood as she gazed across the open plain toward the woods. Pale Xiang and Tai Ming followed, but kept their distance. They knew what she was thinking. "Are you the messenger?" Lin Ruting asked. A long pause followed. The wind blew casually, carrying no memory of the recent screams. "No," Tao Ming said. "He's already dead." The tale, like all events which irreparably changed the destiny of man, was of a short, accidental encounter. A stranger died, his mission charted out in words as few and sparse as his life. For a young man with an aching desire to be more than what the heavens had ordained for him, the opportunity was too captivating. The May court granted a general amnesty 2 years after the deaths of my parents because they needed men to enforce its laws and even more men to fight their battles. Though they pardoned me, I never forgave them. With that, he said, looking over at the bag, I can do both. Have my revenge and reverse my bad karma. Lin Ruting was attentive but remained silent throughout the short account. The man who was to kill another carried on his life instead, meeting with a woman who was to ultimately abscond with the map and falling in love with her. She thought of how tightly the karmic web binds. People often say it is full of sieves but inescapable. "Ruting 姐姐," Pao Xiang called out. "We didn't mean to." "I understand," Lin Ruting said with a smile that was as gentle as the moonlight. "Maybe that truly belongs to you," she said to Tao Ming. Each day, good people die. Heroes are few while villains are numerous. The world lost another hero when he died. Nameless but not irrelevant. Heroes befriend heroes. If the late hero saw in the closing minutes of his life something within you that moved him to disclose his secret of that magnitude, then have no worries either. The sun may set, and the sun may rise, but the star never ceases to shine. Because its true nature could never be diminished by its surrounding, Tao Ming wanted to say in reply. "Let nothing lost be lost in vain," Lin Ruting said before she headed back into the cave. "Is Wuai the best swordsman in the pugilistic world?" Feng Xiaoyan said softly, not wanting to disturb the others. "Yes," whispered Li Xiang, "but he doesn't want to hear that. Then he can get whatever he wants, right? Like money or position in the government." "Yes," the little girl giggled. "All he wants is Ruting Jie, though." "Are you related to them?" Li Xiang shook her head. "I've been orphaned." After a short pause, she added, "Like you." "You know?" "From the beginning by the way they bully you. Don't worry though, Wuai and Ruting Jie hate bullies. They'll protect you." Xiaoyan laughed out loud for the first time. "Why that look? I believe you." "I don't want you to leave us." "Why not?" "Because I want you to be happy too," Li Xiang said before snuggling up close to the older girl. Lin Ruting found a place near the entrance behind a rather large boulder which helped shield her from the periodic cold drafts that entered. "Is she asleep?" she asked when she saw Feng Xiaoyan approach. The girl nodded. "Why did you come for me earlier today?" "I didn't think you wanted to die." "How do you know I didn't want to die?" "A person who courts death does not need a reason to die." "What is the purpose of living if it is just sorrow? People who loved me, people whom I loved, they're all gone. Death is the only certainty in the end." Lin Ruting placed a hand gently over Xiaoyan's eyes. "What do you see?" "Darkness." "And now?" She lifted her hand. The cave was dark, but a small beam of moonlight shone through the entranceway, and the faint light from the small campfire flickered continuously, making shadows dance against the wall. Feng Xiaoyan looked at Ruting for an answer, and then revelation seeped in. Her pupils dilated, and the corners of her mouth drew up into a smile. She started to giggle, which turned to a hushed laughter, as she pressed her hands to her mouth. Xiaoyan got up and ran out. Lin Ruting followed her until they were in the cold air again, perched on a flat boulder atop the mouth of the cave. The answer was so obvious that Feng Xiaoyan felt silly for not seeing it earlier. Every time she blinked to close her eyes to sleep, the reminder was there. "And death?" "Close your eyes again," Ruting said. She understood its meaning. "And the purpose of life?" "Close your eyes," Ruting said again. Xiaoyan did and saw nothing. Was she looking into the dark outer sky or deep into her own soul? "Do you know what lies beyond the furthest star?" Xiaoyan shook her head, though she thought that there probably were more stars. I don't know either, but some believe that is where the heavenly Jade King lives, a metaphysical speculation, much like the unanimous belief in existence itself. Lin Ruting said this last bit with a broad smile, as if in jest. Feng Xian looked serious. She had never gone to worship the symbol of the White Sword sect's founder, nor did she pray to the numerous other deities across the Central Plains. Why should she? No gods ever heard her prayers nor delivered on them. Can you see Wu Cheng? Lin Ruting asked. Not from here. Oh? Ruting said, sounding a little disappointed. Most of it is that way, and those are in the way. The young girl pointed to the dark mountainous ridges that appeared like the spine of a resting dragon. So we can't see it even from this elevation. Standing up won't help. You should sit back down. We're looking from the wrong angle. Lin Ruting smiled. Foolish me. Now I've worn myself out by wasting so much effort when the truth is I can't see. I'm going back in. Don't stay too long. Feng Xian continued to sit on the flat rock, even as the wind picked up. She stood up and leaned forward onto her tiptoes, looking in the direction Ruting was facing. Foolish, she hissed as she turned to walk away, but a smile on her face remained, realizing the depth of the woman's message. The small wooden pillar of the tofu shop shattered as easily as the merchandise it housed. As the roof collapsed, the fighters escaped into the empty street. Lin Wuai bounded toward a corner, but Wu Tianxue caught up with him. Wu Tianxue's heart-piercing sword thrust was suspended in place by a focused burst of qi from Wu Wuai's opposing palms. The pale-faced swordsman exerted more pressure, and his blade pierced through the invisible barrier, forcing Wu Wuai to flip aside. The sword sliced sideways and came close to opening the unarmed man's stomach. A series of thrusts and slices followed and forced Wu Wuai to channel even more qi to block the attacks. Blood ran down his lips as the forced use of qi aggravated his internal injuries. This won't do. Something was amiss. Wu Tianxue had two opportunities to take his life during the onslaught, but did not. He knew the man hadn't stayed his hands out of mercy. Was this a sadistic game to Wu Tianxue? A strong cyclone of snow picked up and swirled between the two swordsmen. They remained motionless, squinting against the ice and snow. Just as suddenly, the wind died. In that moment, Lin Wuai switched his stance. To defeat the sword without the sword. Bo tree is no tree, nor is the mind a standing mirror bright. Since all is originally empty, where does the dust alight? A Taiji stance, an empty form. Wu Tianxue was explosive in his attacks, his power undeniable. He ripped through the snow-covered grounds and into the tiles where Lin Wuai had stood. He followed with a swirling thrust at his opponent's abdomen, and retreated a step as his leading sword hand rolled back and then forward like a recoiling snake. The maneuver was fast and fluid, but he missed. Wu Tianxue was markedly surprised, not with the result, but with his opponent's response. Lin Wuai's counter had no power. He did not strike back with a powerful palm strike to the spine of the blade to deflect. Lin Wuai hooked Wu Tianxue's shorthand instead, rotated it sideways, and pulled him forward. The pale-faced swordsman temporarily lost his footing, and the moment provided enough time for Lin Wuai to crowd him further, cutting linearly with his hand and body. The maneuver unbalanced Wu Tianxue, and he tumbled backwards. The pale-faced man recovered and went on the offensive again. He slashed hard and thrust with even more might than before, but each time he countered nothingness. Lin Wuai either anticipated his next strike and disrupted it, or waited for his end stroke before countering, thereby preserving his qi and not overexert. Wu Tianxue's next attack was as vicious as the previous. The speed was so overwhelmingly fast that the eyes hardly saw the move until the blade's edge was upon Lin Wuai, who arched back to let the sword glide harmlessly by while simultaneously kicking out his leg to force Wu Tianxue to pivot away. Each movement was efficient. He was as yielding as the bamboo, lithely bending and turning to evade every stroke, seeking an opportunity to exploit. To overcome the fast with the slow, the hard with the soft. The battle continued in this manner, the power of Wu Tianxue's attack dissipating at the end of each attack without making contact. Lin Wuai often provided a counterattack at various vectors and angles that never directly challenged the brutal strength of his opponent, and yet, to Wu Tianxue, the power was frightening. As the fight wore on, Lin Wuai noticed that Wu Tianxue's power started to plateau. The idea invigorated him despite the various cuts across his body. The battleground had moved to the northern gates. When the two fighters separated again, Wu Tianxue coughed up blood, and Lin Wuai nursed the new wound. This is the end, Lin Wuai thought. Wu Tianxue had aimed to kill in his previous counter. The man was finally desperate. What changed? Lin Wuai had adopted the wind cloud palms out of necessity, which proved more than effective against Wu Tianxue's swordplay. The Taiji set required little qi to execute and relied mostly on the strategic deployment of power, to meet force with no force, and no power with full power. The answer was in front of him, but Lin Wuai could not quite grasp it. Wu Tianxue was breathing much faster than before, clearly exerting himself more. His impenetrable eyes were wide with an anger that his ageless face did not express. He returned to a defensive stance. Like the first gleam of morning light that instantly illuminated the dark earth, Wu's defensive pose provided Lin Wuai the answer to his thoughts. The Purloined Third Book was an internal martial arts treatise, but it taught no qi building exercises. The technique spoke of ways to siphon the qi of the user's opponents. Lin Wuai recalled how every opponent weakened against Wu Tianxue. The secret to the man's longevity was the sequestration of qi. He had a surplus of absorbed qi from his prior battles, but nearly no outflow during his imprisonment. This life force retarded his aging. Everything made sense. As Lin Wuai stared at the opponent before him, he had one remaining question. Who will attack first? Intermittent sobs and coughs echoed in the cave. When Tang Ming and Ma Xianda shouted a warning, people were quick to their feet. A small figure standing at the edge of the forest had alerted the men. He peered tentatively over the horizon and settled his gaze in the direction of the mountain. Ming and Xianda knew that the man could not make out the small entrance from that distance, but it was time for them to leave. "They're nearby," said Xianda. The man was several feet into the open field when he crouched to study the tracks. Everyone was silent and alert. Even children stopped their mumblings. Someone in the back spoke up after a long, dark silence. "I'm not going to wait for them to find me." Li Xiang recognized the man to be Huan and shouted, "That's the crab!" "You can't leave," commanded Lin Ruting. "You draw them in." "What nonsense is this?" said a woman clutching her child. "Maybe their intent isn't even us. They went after us only after they saw that bag." "I agree," someone shouted. "Give up the bag and the girl." The debate raged on. Ma Wuliang momentarily joined in by suggesting emphatically that they should give up all the girls. Despite the clamorous atmosphere, only a handful of men and women actually demanded to leave and hand over the girl and the bag to the bandits. Most were passive observers, too afraid to take a side. Ma Xianda was the only one who kept to his duty, and the man whom he watched had disappeared. "If you want, then kill us, like they do," a small, thin man said as he got up. "Don't let them go," Lin Ruting said, but it was too late. 3 of the 4 men had already sprung away when Tang Ming's hidden sword left his waist. Adding more death to the tally would not help, and he let the 3 women pass, and 2 more, and then whoever wanted to leave could simply go. Their position was no longer secure. "Come here, look," Ma Xianda called out. Loud gasps erupted amongst the people as they made out the tiny ant-like figures at the base of the mountainous range. The white on the men nearly camouflaged them against the snowy plains, but their long black hair were like swirls of ink on paper, making them easier to identify. "We are too slow. If we make it through Chuantiandao, they'll just follow and catch up to us," said Tang Ming. Li Xiang stood, holding tightly to Feng Xiaoyan's hand, while staying near Lin Ruting's side. She switched her gaze between Lin Ruting and Feng Xiaoyan, as if trying to read their thoughts. Both women were quiet. "Everyone, our position has been compromised. Whether you stay with us or scatter and run is trivial. I'm not sure either would improve your chances," Lin Wuting said at last, and looked at Tang Ming and Ma Xianda. "My injuries are not light, otherwise I won't want to make such a request." "Please speak, Lady Lin," Ming said, and Xianda nodded. "Lives are at stake, and even more so if the map does not reach the right hands," Lin Wuting said. "Would one of you be willing to go with me and draw them away? There's little chance we'll live." "Ruting 姐姐," Li Xiang spoke and pleaded with tearful eyes. Lin Ruting knelt beside her. Tear tracks ran down her face, though her voice remained unquivering. "Silly girl, remember what you first said about life and death?" The girl nodded. "What joy is there in life? What sorrow is there in death?" "Do you no longer believe in that?" Li Xiang vehemently shook her head. "I thought the same too when I was much younger. I still do, but in a different way. There is much joy in my life." Lin Ruting dabbed away tears from Li Xiang's face. She wanted to say that she still had hope that maybe she will survive, but the fear of disappointing the child immobilized her tongue. Ruting rose and looked at Feng Xiaoyan. A smile formed on her face. The same smile she had given the teenager when they first met, but it seemed much, much sweeter to Xiaoyan now. When you close your eyes, nothing is yours. When you open them, the entire universe is yours. That is what you meant, wasn't it? Feng Xiaoyan asked. Nothing is ever permanent, not even sorrow. Like Ruting, Feng Xiaoyan was flushed, and rivulets of tears streamed down her face, dripping off her chin, and yet her voice too did not quiver. It was strong, clear, and adamant. No, she said. If you go, there is no guarantee we will still be safe. If you go, there is no guarantee they will be stopped. And they must be. Miss Feng was right, Ma Xianda commented. Lady Lin, I can hear by your voice that your internal injuries are severe. We need a better plan. There is, Xiaoyan said, turning to Tang Ming. You've borrowed my coat and returned it worn and torn. You won't mind if I take Miss Pao Xiang's coat. I do mind, Pao Xiang said. Let me go. You can't, Tang Ming said. Each branch has its own direct reports. You told me that. This won't get across without you. Miss Pao, please, lend me your coat, Lin Ruting said. Do not protest about my condition again. I'm more capable than any of the other women here, and I am the only choice. There's a small rocky path that at first pass would seem like an alternate route over the mountains, but it leads nowhere but up. Midway up the slope, the path ends, facing a deep cavern. It narrows significantly at that point, and one person can defend it or find a way to block it. Feng Xiaoyan stared at Ruting defiantly, and I am the only girl here that knows the way. The teenage girl was already fitting herself with Pao Xiang's robe as she spoke. The logic was difficult to contest. Her knowledge of the land was more important than an injured Lin Ruting. A woman of Lin Ruting's sensibilities understood. No, you can't, Li Xiang wailed. The girl whose poise and demeanor suggested someone much older was just 10 years old. At this moment, she was much like other children, grasping tightly to Feng Xiaoyan's skirt and trembling terribly. You won't do without Ruting Jie. She has much to teach you. I'm too used to being alone. I won't adjust to being with people, not even with you, Feng Xiaoyan said. Hot, salty tears rolled down her cheeks, and she leaned into Li Xiang and whispered, I am happy. With a tug, the straps to Pao Xiang's expensive fur coat tightened around her neck. The perfumed scent remained, and it was the first time that Feng Xiaoyan was so close to luxury and beauty. Will you please do my hair? She asked Lin Ruting. Pao Xiang took off the jade hairpin holding up her hair and handed it to Lin Ruting, who tied Xiaoyan's hair into a bun in the same manner as Pao Xiang's. Since I was a child, I have never worn my hair up, the teenage girl said as she touched her face, feeling the contours of the scar. Xiaoyan's only regret was not having a mirror to see her new look. Thank you. Xiaoyan姐姐, you're beautiful, Li Xiang said through sobs. Pao Xiang handed the embroidered bag to Feng Xiaoyan. Ruting Jie, Xiaoyan said. I have only known anger and hate all my life. I don't know how else to express love. I can only feel it and desire it. There are many, many Feng Xiaoyans and many, many Wu Chengs. I can only cry for them, cry with them. But you and Li Xiang can teach them how to smile and laugh with them. I want to see that world. I want to see a Xiaoyan whose smiles measure more than her tears. Miss Feng, let me accompany you, Tang Ming said as he bowed graciously. Ming Gege, Pao Xiang said. Tang Ming gave her hand a gentle squeeze. No one can fight their leader but me, he said. I'm sorry, Xiang. I want to win against a great fighter at least once. To make it believable, we'll need volunteers as decoy, Ma Xianda said. I'll go, innkeeper Chen said. There are no more customers at the inn. No more. This is the only way to ensure their safety, Ma Xianda pointed at the children, who were sick or wounded, to remind the small group of refugees. Several recently childless fathers and mothers volunteered. Pao Xiang and Li Xiang outwardly sobbed, and Ma Wuniang wailed uncontrollably, throwing curses at her husband, who promptly sealed several of her acupuncture points to silence her. He could not risk her safety or others. We must move now, said Tang Ming, with Pao Xiang still hugging tightly to him. Feng Xiaoyan bent down, hugged, and then kissed Li Xiang. She turned to face Lin Wuting and embraced her. Then she pulled away and hurried out the cavern, but not without leaving them with a memory of her warm smile. The group of villagers without friends or family made similarly brisk exits. Only Tang Ming lingered at Pao Xiang's insistence. Do not feel sad for me. Tell the men of the Kuang clan that it is I, Tang Ming, who brought them victory." With that, he freed himself from her grasp and departed. Ma Xian sighed. "Uncle Ma," asked Li Xiang through tear-filled eyes, "why did you sigh?" Putting a strong, caring arm around the girl's shoulder, he leaned in to make sure only her faithful ear could hear it. Men can sometimes be like a woman and say the opposite of what they truly mean. Snow collected under skin and hair. Lin Wuai waited not because he hoped to outweight his opponent, but because he needed the time to think. Chang Kong had given him the book for a reason. Surely the old man must know of a way to win. Emptiness is form. Form is emptiness. Was this what the old stranger wanted him to remember? A man like Wu Tianxue, who relied on the internal qi of others to fortify himself, should be reactionary. He could not initiate an effective attack without already having a reserved pool of qi of his own. Wu Tianxue shifted his weight and angled his foot into an offensive position. After a moment's debate, the man returned to his original stance. He will not attack, not ever again. The effectiveness of the wind cloud palms lay in its empty forms, none of which required qi. The system facilitated the flow of energy. Each movement was soft and yielding like willows in the wind. A more traditional form would have given Wu Tianxue the advantage, allowing him to drain any strong qi coming at him, and forcing the user to expend even more energy to overcome this increasing deficit. Bo tree is no tree, nor is the mind a standing mirror bright. Since all is originally empty, where does the dust alight? Bo tree is no tree, nor is the mind a standing mirror bright. Since all is originally empty, where does the dust alight? The verse echoed in his head. Why should he not cultivate his qi? If the movements of the wind cloud palms were to follow the natural order of all things, then it follows the way of heaven, where all unite as one. Form, formless. Power, powerless. Lin Wuai began to move, lifting his wrists up, as if summoned by the heavens above. His elbow slowly drooped when the earth beckoned. His legs bent as he crouched, opening an empty form. First one way, then the other, allowing the wind to turn and caress him. In a smooth, soft, circular motion, he tilted back again to his back leg, while his hands hugged onto the spirit of the moon like it were a newborn. His fingertips tingled with the flow of qi. Wu Ai's breathing steadied, each breath rolled in strong like the waves of the sea. When the mind ceases its thoughts and breaks down the enclave between it and the world, then a realization of infinite space and time can be achieved. If no barriers existed to begin with, then what is there to set limits? When Lin Ruai struck, Wu Tianxue was wholly unprepared by the speed and power. He blocked with the back of his blade, but the force still threw him back. The attacks felt like an angry hailstorm. Wu Tianxue tried a stronger defense as he baited Lin Wuai to use more and more of his internal energy. Seemingly devoid of qi, but at the same time abound with it, Lin Wuai was astonishing. For once, Wu Tianxue was at a loss. His opponent's strength was inexhaustible and overwhelming. Each blow had the strength of crashing waves and forced Wu Tianxue to retreat outside the city walls. He coughed up blood. His sword hand trembled under the impact of Lin Wuai's blows. Despite the turn in fortune, he remained stoic. He gathered himself, and in a single bound he lunged ahead at Lin Wuai. The sword in his hand scattered like sunlight from a prism, thrusting and slashing at Lin Wuai from multiple angles. They all missed. A shift in the air alerted Wu Tianxue to Lin Wuai's presence as currents in the water warned a fish of an incoming attack. He shifted to the side and evaded the kick. Wu Tianxue backflipped while covering himself with a swift slash in the air to maintain distance. Lin Wuai waited until the descent to lunge at his opponent with speed and power, forcing Wu Tianxue to somersault backwards again. Only this time, he arched forward in midair and thrust his sword out, catching Lin Wuai in the chest. As he landed, Wu Tianxue drove the sword forward. Lin Wuai retreated, and the pale-faced swordsman slashed at him, drawing blood. No smile or maniacal laughter celebrated the small victory, but the glow in Wu Tianxue's eyes indicated a sadistic pleasure in the bloodletting. He measured men by how much they bleed, a common currency that simplified matters. He whipped his sword across the cool air. Lin Wuai pivoted, hooked Wu Tianxue's foot, and hit him with another palm strike that sent the man sprawling back. Despite the dazzling speed of the fight, Lin Wuai perceived all the movements of his opponents as slowed. Every slight change in the air rippled its way to him, and he reacted before his opponent had a chance to adjust. The wounds that he accumulated in the battle could not impede him. He moved to the natural flow of his qi. Wu Tianxue executed a powerful strike that parted the air and resounded with a loud boom as the air collapsed on contact with the blade's sharp edge. Lin Wuai remained unperturbed and calmly deflected the blow. No sound pierced his ears, no light blinded his sight, and no thoughts troubled his heart. He executed a steady stream of calm movements to elude his opponent's increasingly stronger but frantic attacks. Wu Tianxue spun in the air like a slashing cyclone and opened a dizzying cycle of attacks. He expected to feel his blade cut into the flesh of his enemy and was shocked to feel a strong pulse of air pound against him. His sword shattered, the fragments blown away like dust in the wind. Lin Wuai moved too fast for him to see. Death came and went, taking the pale-faced man's soul. No wound marked Wu Tianxue's corpse. No hand touched him, but his heart sac had burst. The great arteries lay severed and shredded, spilling his life's blood into his body cavities. The man, now dead, seemed pitiful. A person unable to see past himself could never see the beauty that occupied the world. He would forever fixate in his own cycle of desire and regret, which begets anger and grief. There was no room to breathe and no space to live. Lin Wuai fell onto the padded snow. He saw himself kneeling on the ground with a downcast gaze as blood dripped from his wounds. He felt no pain, just a coldness. His vision blurred and his mind wanted to shrink upon itself, but he refused to let it happen, knowing that there would be no escape from that blackness. He rocked from side to side to use his weight and momentum to rise. He succeeded unsteadily to his feet, and a wave of excruciating pain hit him in the chest with every breath. Despite the burn, he kept breathing. Lin Wuai managed to smile. When another sharp spasm started, he spat a mouthful of blood onto the ground and laughed defiantly at the sky. "Are you afraid?" Feng Xiaoyan shook her head. She was not sure whether her life fitted the saying, "Live with the lightness of plumage, die with the gravity of Mount Tai," but she was headstrong about protecting those she loved. "It gave me happiness. I shall return it." Tang Ming laughed. "You are brave, Miss Feng. As are you." "I'm not brave. I'm not content with dying here, but it can't be helped." He sighed so deeply that Xiaoyan thought he might have wanted to expire what was left in his life all at once. "Here's as good a place as any other," she said. "You know, some people believe dying young is a blessing. One can preserve one's beauty and health for eternity." "Rubbish!" Tang Ming laughed again. He appeared to be in a jovial mood. "I think so too. I never feared dying and took many risks, but now I felt ashamed of viewing life so carelessly. When you're alive, you can always be more than who you are." In the shadowy limelight, the valley that encompassed Wuchang lay in complete stillness. Beyond what Feng Xiaoyan could see, her heart remembered in a dreamy fog the days of summers past when she played with her sister across those same plains, upon those same hills, and amongst those same forests as the ones laying empty and barren below her. The small stream that ran through the forest was exceptionally peaceful. She closed her eyes, and the sound of the rustling water whispered a certain peace. Xiaoyan had a sudden yearning to bathe in the golden glow of the evening sun, but a sad realization filled her being. "Have you been to the Central Plains?" she asked Tang Ming. "I come from there," he said. She asked him a series of questions regarding the Central Plains, the places, the people, and the history. She recited to Tang Ming what Li Xiang had said before. Tang Ming listened patiently and nodded in agreement on some points and added counterpoints for a more balanced view of the world on others. All in all, Feng Xiaoyan concluded that the Central Plains was a wonderful place, though she thought that the people were pretty much like the ones here. The fights for titles and ranks carried greater prestige, and the deaths of warriors for elusive martial arts treatises sounded more tragic. But underneath it all, the bickers between farmers and the conspiracies of village heads to depose their political rivals operated much the same and was fueled by the same human greed and lust for power. A chatter started amongst the small party. Tiny black dots grew ever larger as they ascended after the group. Tang Ming put a protective hand around Feng Xiaoyan's shoulder. "Don't worry, Xiaoyan Mei. Brother Ming will protect you to the last." She glanced up at the handsome Tang Ming and quickly looked away as her face turned a rosy red. "Now they'll fall for it for sure," Ming said, gleefully while walking faster ahead. "We cannot choose the conditions of our births, but we can certainly decide how to die. There's nothing of this world that I can take with me upon death, but my karmic demerits will accompany me to the next world," laughed Chen Daming. "We all have karmic demerits," Fu Ren, the carpenter who had lost his family, said. Tears rolled down his large face like giant boulders off a mountain slope. Was it vengeance or regret that drove these people to this ultimate sacrifice? Xiaoyan was not certain of the answer, except that it was not life undeserving of the living that pushed them on, but rather a death worth dying that spurred them forth. Despair transformed into purposefulness. Who they were and what they had done no longer mattered. The end united them. The moon appeared brighter than usual, and basked the mountainous path with a soft bluish-white glow that the snow reflected perfectly. The small path forced the party to walk no more than 2 at a time, nearly shoulder to shoulder, until they came upon the large rock face. "Marvelous!" exclaimed Taming. "The boulders over there could be used to close off the exit." He pointed at several large rocks that loomed precariously over them on either side. Men and women began to ascend the even more treacherous inclines to reach the rocks. The climb was precarious and near impossible, but they were determined not to die a futile death. The simple goal gave them strength. Like lizards scurrying up a tree bark, the former citizens of Wuchang clawed their way forward. Tang Ming held Xiaoyan close to him in a protective embrace to sell her character as Pao Xiang. The two continued to walk until they reached the rock face. On either side was a steep precipice. A sea of fog gathered around, muddling the height, but all knew it was a deathly fall for anyone tumbling over the edge. Tang Ming looked around, mentally calculating the space he had to maneuver. Several villagers were already standing behind large boulders on the incline, flanking the path. Specks of snow fell from the ledges as the villagers pushed and shoved to test their strength and the stability of the rocks. Ming turned to Xiaoyan, his brows knitted in deep concentration and his eyes widened at some realization only he knew. He motioned for her to hide while he ran up an incline, scaling it as easily as a spider up a wall. Xiaoyan found a boulder to dart behind. She peeked around the rock at the path. At last the white-clad men appeared, and the howling of the wind caught within the chasm grew ever louder and more frantic. The men emerged, walking in pairs. Their weapons were coated with blood. She had to draw them in and hold their attention for the villagers to have a chance at trapping them. She darted from one hiding place toward another boulder. The sudden movement was enough to attract their attention. They converged on her, but stopped when Tang Ming flashed through their ranks and crossed blades with several of them. A jet of blood shot from the gaping wound in one of the men's necks, and he fell. The sound of thunder followed as rocks tumbled down, closing off the small path. A few villagers lost their footing and fell to their deaths. The young swordsman stood between them and the mound of rocks that blocked their retreat. The men had made no attempt to withdraw, perhaps knowing the futility of their act, as boulders, large and small, continued to pile one after another. 10 pairs of eyes stared listlessly at Tang Ming, but he knew that their disinterested gaze caught every movement he made. Villagers on the ledge gazed at the arena of death they had created and cheered. They knew the white-clad men were dead regardless of the outcome of this fight. The wind blew, and Whipping Willow, which had left its master's belt, swayed impatiently as blood dripped from its pointed tip. The arc of white-clads that half surrounded Tang Ming moved in a coordinated fashion. Whipping Willow undulated rapidly and shook off the few remaining droplets of blood. Then it wailed. The thin blade sang its deadly song, but the white figures matched its speed and evaded the attacks, leaning left and right in an off-balance manner. They countered with lightning-fast attacks of their own and hacked and thrust from unorthodox angles. A small group of refugees fished under the layers of snow for stones and started to bombard the white-clads with them. Most missed, but it served enough of a distraction to allow Tang Ming to cut several of his opponents, dyeing their clothes red. He pounced this way and that like a snow leopard on the hunt. He looked very different than the young man who had lost the duel less than a day before. Feng Xiaoyan could see the fundamental difference between him and his white-clad opponents. He fights like he still wants to live. Tang Ming was like a weary swimmer. Each time his head appeared above the water for a breath of fresh air, the white sea spirits would pull him down and entangle him in a flurry of attacks. He was more efficient and more talented than the group of men. Feng Xiaoyan found it hard to tell who had entangled whom. He was often not the drowning swimmer, but a dolphin that had encircled the school of fish. Feng Xiaoyan noticed one man who did very little despite the chaos. The fake Miao Dan simply leapt from side to side whenever Ming attacked him. He had yet to counter. The old man looked past the fighting and locked eyes with her. Then he advanced. His steps were controlled and patient. Gone was the emotional old man who vehemently denounced her for framing him, or the frail coward who hid his head and covered his ears at the sound of fighting. He came at her with a face as white and as blank as the garment he now wore. She was afraid, but she forced herself to shut off the emotion. 1, 2, 3. She measured her life no longer by years but by footfalls. At least they'll number more than 16. The thought brought her a sense of comfort. The night was especially quiet, and despite the lack of sleep, no one in the group felt tired. They knew the price Feng Xiaoyan's group paid in order to get them this far. Darkness began to fade as they approached Chuantiandao, Heaven's Pass. What would have been jubilance turned to dread when Lin Ruting called a halt. Bodies scattered about the mouth of the pass and partially covered in snow. Lady Lin is certainly worthy of betting any hero. Lin Headway's deep, clear voice and derisive tone was hard to forget. He and his men emerged from the shadows. "You slay them?" Ma Xianda asked. "They're just villagers." "Traitors who want to surrender to our enemies," the general corrected. Wei Qingren had only a handful of men remaining, but he did not need much to threaten a group of mostly women and children along with the sick and the wounded. "Lady Lin, please escort my wife along with everybody else away." Ma Xianda unstrapped his bag and let it fall to the ground. "Brother Ma, farewell." He nodded and smiled. Lin Ruting was truly special. Her decisiveness surpassed most men, and she did not let emotions overtake her rationality. Lin Headway laughed loudly. He was free to do so with the threat of the white-clad bandits eliminated, and Lin Wuai most likely dead. Lin Ruting appeared too injured to help. He would take her as his bed warmer by nightfall, and earn the merit of retrieving Songjiang's map. What is there not to laugh about? His star was rising. A loud crack broke Wei Qingren out of his fantasy. Ma Xianda's sword cleaved one of his soldiers' spear in half and cut halfway through the man's helmet. 4 spears thrust at Ma Xianda, but he sidestepped an attack and countered, wounding 2 of them. Lin Headway let loose his dragon spear. The clash of sword and spear reverberated in the air. 3 consecutive thrusts at Ma Xianda's throat, chest, and abdomen happened within a heartbeat. Xianda parried them. Wei Qingren missed the next thrust but cut sideways, forcing Xianda to duck. He retracted the spear and thrust again. This time, the spear slid past Ma Xianda's arm and opened his skin and fat. Blood started to flow. Lin Ruting let the group sway. She held tightly to Ma Wunyang, but the women started to lag behind. The pass was long, and they felt the urgency to reach the exit. Flanking the party were the sharp cliff walls of the mountain that the dark blue band of night separated like a celestial river through adjoining banks. Once they got through, the party could split off and make it difficult for the white-clad bandits or Mei soldiers to track. More than once, Lin Ruting had to stop and coughed up large amounts of blood. She was alive, but the combination of the poison and the heavy beating took an immense toll on her body. "Look! Look!" Li Xiang exclaimed. The sky unfolded above them as dark rocks gave way to the ever-widening expanse of the navy night. A wave of fresh air washed over them. Lin Ruting smiled and felt the heavy burden partially lightened, perhaps a little too much so. She reeled back, losing sensation in her legs as her vision faded. Before she lost consciousness, she heard 2 distinct voices. That of Pao Xiang calling her a name, and that of Ma Wunyang's shrilling. Then all went silent. Thud, thud, thud. The dragon spear struck the ground. Ma Xianda had rolled away. He had killed most of the remaining men, and Wei Qingren cut down the 3 that stood paralyzed with fear. The heavy metal spear bore down hard, but Ma Xianda deflected it. The edges of his blade chipped and rolled. Had it been a thinner one, Ma Xianda's sword would have been bent and rendered unusable. General Wei grew impatient. He had underestimated his opponent and dallied longer than expected. Lin Ruting and the others must have gone past Chuantiandao. The delay frustrated and angered him. His impatience showed in the increasingly aggressive maneuvers that often left him exposed. He was gambling. The general was the stronger and the more skilled fighter, and Ma Xianda knew it. His hatred of Lin Headway had built to an insuppressible extent, but he did not let it control him. He channeled the emotion more judiciously. Only the victor had a right to exact vengeance. Ma Xianda snapped his neck to the side, narrowly escaping the sharp tip of the spear, but the shaft smashed down onto his shoulder. The follow-up sweep would have broken his neck had he not ducked and slipped. He felt the metal shaft glide over his neck and anticipated the next move. As expected, Lin Headway pulled the spear back. Ma Xianda sidestepped again and avoided the thrust, but the return slash opened another deep white gash. Pain racked Xianda's body, and he scrambled back. His large sword began to feel heavy, a dangerous sign for any warrior. He did not leave Wei Qingren unscathed either, but the few gashes on his burly frame meant little more than scratches. The internal injuries suffered in the bout with Wu Tianxue was what hampered the big man. The spearhead came at Ma Xianda once more. Lin Wuai missed, but he twirled the weapon around and hit his opponent with the blunt end in the chest below the sternum. Ma Xianda jolted back and spat out blood. A thick strand of blood sludge hung from his mouth and chin. He swayed unsteadily and bent his knees to stabilize himself, but he still maintained a firm grasp on his sword. "Only death awaits," Lin Wuai said as he approached and raised his spear. "Only death." Ah! The scream was horrifically hollow as it came from the depths of hell. The general, who had fought in countless battles, stood frozen in shock and completely forgotten who the mad woman was. His heart and nerves left him and provided an opportunity for Ma Wunyang to take his back. The armor on his body rattled as he dealt with the extra weight, and he staggered. Ma Wunyang clawed at his eyes with her long, sharp nails, screaming the entire time. Lin Wuai's anguished screams joined hers. "Wunyang," Ma Xianda said. His voice was soft, gentle even, but it was enough for the woman to hear. Wuxian took advantage of her momentary lapse and flipped her over his broad shoulders and fumbled for the spear. "Get up. Get up. Get up!" Ma Xianda's mind raced. His heart thumped, but his body would not obey. He saw through a hazy blur the dazed expression in Ma Wunyang, staring emptily at him. Then he came, speed and power returning for the last time to his broken body. He tightened his grip on the sword handle and rushed forward, lifting and spinning his wife out of harm's way. He angled the tip of the sword at the general's meaty throat and thrust. A loud gasp escaped the man's lips as the spear pierced Ma Xianda's chest and through to his wife's despite his best efforts to shield her. He never lost his grip, and his blade exited Wuxian's throat. "Ma Xianda," the woman spoke in a feeble whisper. "I hate you." Ma Xianda looked at his wife and with a slight smile replied, "I know." Chen Taming was the first to lead the charge, and a large sickle ended his life. His death, though brutal, brought about a change in the morale of the group. They ran at the white-clads. Some picked up the weapons of the dead, while others charged with nothing more than stones in their hands. Taming took advantage of the distraction and let loose his belt sword, wounding several more men. The villagers tackled them and began to bite and tear into their opponents like rabid animals. The white-clad, pale-faced bandits slashed, punched, and kicked them and ended up in mutual annihilation. The last of the villagers, a woman, met her end as she held unrelentingly onto the sash of her opponent until a kick smashed her face and crushed her skull. Taming fared little better. The vicious battle wore him down despite his youth, and the fake Miaodian's faint step toward Feng Xiaoyan lured him into lowering his guard. As he chased the imposter, the older man twisted around and caught the young man in midair and pierced his chest. Taming kicked out and sent Miaodian flying to the ground. Like a predator, drawn to the sight and smell of blood, the disguiser immediately leapt back into the fray. Ming spun to dodge one attack after another as three more opponents joined in. Miao slashed at the young swordsman, drawing a thin line of blood across his cheek. Taming wasted no time in lashing back with Weeping Willow as it twisted toward its target at an impossible angle. The blade tip entered the imposter's flesh and forced the man to back away. Taming flashed the light blade with increasing speed, creating a near-impenetrable golden sphere around him. Weeping Willow split vessels and parted tendons wherever it encountered flesh. Despite the damage, these men appeared impervious to the pain and continued to fight. A multitude of slashes and thrusts came at him. Taming pivoted away and cut at them to create space. One of the men sliced at his knee. He rolled away, but when he rose to counter, another low cut severed his left Achilles tendon. Taming dropped to the ground and rolled away once more. The muscles in his calf bulged into an excruciating mass. When they came at him again, he rolled and rolled, never allowing them to trap him. He jabbed at him and he retaliated with a few quick cuts here and there, but the effectiveness of his once fluid sword movements declined. He was tiring fast. He changed tactic when a man with a spear stabbed so ferociously into the ground that it was momentarily stuck. The delay allowed Taming to catch the weapon, unbalance its wielder, and slip behind the man to pull himself up. He had no intent on letting the man live, but he needed the respite, no matter how brief. He miscalculated. These men had no camaraderie. They attacked, swords and spears piercing through the human shield. Taming had moved, but not quick enough as their weapons punctured through his skin and bone. As he stumbled, he sliced at the nearest white-clad bandit and felled the man. He found his balance and turned in time to see the fake Miaodian approach. He slashed at air and felt the burn of steel enter him. The impostor peered into Tang Ming's eyes, his face an emotionless slate, but the words that spilled from his mouth were tauntingly cruel. Your last wish? I shall grant anything to a dying man. Tang Ming slumped further onto the sword and into Meldan's arms. The only sign of life from the young swordsman was his heaving chest. His eyes were shut and his head lolled lifelessly on Meldan's shoulder. Blood gushed from his mouth. Tang Ming lifted his head slightly and with much effort opened his eyes, but they carried an unfocused gaze. He thought he heard the man's words, but it was the cool whisper of the wind that filled his ears. Tang Ming sucked in a mouthful of air, inflating his lungs before clearly enunciating his next words. To live. The infamous disguiser wearing Meldan's face had heard enough. He turned his cheek in mock disgust of the violence to come and gripped tightly to his sword. He twisted his blade as he withdrew it. Tang Ming let out a weak groan and slid to his knees. Blood pooled around him. Hey! Feng Xiaoyan shouted. She held the purple bag over the windy abyss. Fake Meldan held out a hand and a curious expression appeared on his face. He wanted to stop her from throwing the bag over the edge, but he looked confused and hesitant. Does he know what it is he wants? For someone like Wei Qingren, the reason was simple: fame, fortune, lust. The impostor did not appear to know what the bag contained or its bigger implications. Why would it matter whether he gained possession of it? Such ignorance made her heart heavy as she looked at him with empathy. To sin without knowing sin. She backed further away until she had run out of space. She made up her mind on the final course of action and wondered whether this pitiful man would join her. It would be a far better choice than to wait for the unrelenting wind to strip her skin, flesh, and sinews bare. Just one more step. Feng Xiaoyan stopped. When she saw Meldan move, she began to count once more and was certain it would be her last. In the vastness of his mind, Tang Ming heard many things, but none more prevailing than that of spring. Birds chirping, children's playing, and the flap of fabric strung on clotheslines against the soft breeze. Was this what death had to dangle before him? I have lost. I have lost. His mind screamed at him, disturbing the calm. Had he? He tried to move but could not. A part of his mind chided him for his weakness and lack of effort. He wanted to return to the promising warmth of spring and the glowing sunlight instead of this cold, bleary white, but that world had vanished. Hearing returned. The wind howled even more than before. When he focused a little more, he made out the crackling of snow under heavy boots and the faint breathing of a woman. She is still alive. His lethargic heart pumped a little harder, and his frozen fingers jerked with renewed life. He felt the weight of weeping willow in his hand. Feng Xiaoyan readied herself and turned into the cliff edge when Meldan sprinted the last few steps and reached for the bag. A sudden numbness went up her spine. She spat blood as her body reeled forward, but a hand had grabbed onto her coat, suspending her over the chasm. Meldan turned her around, and she knew why. She tried to shake herself loose. The grass on the bag grew weaker as the man fought her for it. A flash of golden yellow like sunlight flooded her vision, and a mist of red splattered across her face. Feng Xiaoyan slid as the headless body tumbled over her and fell. She finally lost her grasp on the empty embroidered bag, which too fell into the darkness. Tang Ming's face was covered in blood. He held out an arm, fully extended as if reaching out for something. His eyes were closed, and she knew they would never open again. The wind whipped her body and fluttered her clothes, but deep inside, she felt a warmth that no amount of cold could penetrate. Feng Xiaoyan closed her eyes. A man spoke to her, and the roaring wind began to fade. She had forgotten his name or his face, but she knew him from long ago. Another sound accompanied his soothing voice, the beating of a temple block, and her lips moved to its rhythmic beating. When Lin Ruting regained consciousness, she saw Li Xiang's misty eyes and smiling face. "You're all right," the little girl screamed with unbridled enthusiasm. Ruting stroked the back of the girl's head. Pale Xiang helped Ruting to her feet. "You must go," the swordswoman said, clutching tightly to Qinghe. They understood the situation. Wei Qingren could catch up to them. Pale Xiang nodded in agreement, but she looked around lost. She took a deep breath to settle herself. The young girl, Feng Xiaoyan, had made the ultimate sacrifice for her sake. She could not falter and waste such a precious gift. She grasped onto her collar, not because of the coat, but because of the importance of the message hidden within her bosom. "What about you?" Piaoxiang asked, and as soon as the words left her mouth, she knew the answer. Lin Ruting's heart had never truly left Wucheng. Ruting gave no reply, and she inwardly thanked the lady for her sensitivity. At least there was someone for her to wait. The two women embraced. They would most likely never see one another. When Piaoxiang squatted down to hug Li Xiang, the girl reached into her breast pocket and produced an exquisite dagger. "For you," the girl said. Piaoxiang tried to decline the gift, but it was too valuable and the little girl had cherished it. Li Xiang urged, "You need to protect them. Protect what you love. Fight for what you believe." Her large eyes spoke earnestly, and Piaoxiang relented and thanked her. Ruting and Xiang'er watched Piaoxiang and the small procession wrap around the side of the mountainous range before heading back. They talked incessantly on the way about various scenarios they might encounter. None came to pass. When they finally arrived, Wei Qingren was dead, and so were the mas, their corpses strung together like beads of sugared berries. Footfalls broke the silence, and Lin Ruting stepped in front of Li Xiang. She raised Qinghe, ready to unsheath the sword. A lone figure appeared. She recognized him immediately. "Wuai Gege!" she yelled, forgetting everything and running toward him with Li Xiang following behind. Somehow, the little girl overtook her and tumbled into Lin Wuai's open arms with such force that he fell onto the snowy ground. Lin Ruting joined them in a long embrace. "You're all right," Li Xiang said. "I know you're truly the invincible swordsman." The girl's unabashed idolization of him caused Lin Wuai to laugh aloud. His mood lightened. "Are you really all right?" Lin Ruting asked. Lin Wuai smiled and nodded. He had already seen the bodies of Ma Xianda, Ma Wunyang, and Wei Qingren. He listened to his wife recount the rest. Violence and death were prevalent even in this remote region. No place for peace, no haven from pain, no shelter from discord. True peace, then, could only come from within. Only from there could it spread without. He knelt in front of the tangled corpses. Lin Wuai thought about the mas, Feng Xiaoyan and Tang Ming. He wished that they had found peace. They had lived for so long in this constant cycle of suffering that he hoped they would finally be free. He stood, walked to his wife, and unsheathed Qinghe. The strokes were fast and accurate. It shattered the steel shaft of the spear and the blade, freeing the bodies. No more. "What shall we do?" Li Xiang asked. The ground was too frozen for a burial. "Find some dry wood," Ruting said. Wuai nodded. They gathered only a small amount, barely enough for 2 bodies. The Lins, with much effort, placed the mas onto the pyre. "Do you still remember how to make a fire?" Wuai asked Li Xiang. The girl nodded and proceeded to start one. The fire grew in the wind. "What about him?" she asked and pointed to Wei Qingren. "All would return to where all originate," Lin Wuai said. He walked over to the corpse. Lionhead Wei still held tightly to his now shattered dragon spear. Lin Wuai knelt beside the body and patiently loosened the dead man's grasp. He laid the spear beside the general and closed his badly scratched eyes. Li Xiang knelt next to Wuai. "Old Lionhead, may you find peace," the girl said. She rose to her feet and produced a small embroidered pouch. She held onto it for a long while, and her chin started to quiver uncontrollably. She tightened her fist and felt the marbles rubbed against one another. Countless memories of her and her brothers rolled in her mind. Through tears and gritted teeth, she threw the pouch into the fire. "Why did you do that?" Lin Ruting asked, hugging her. "We will never see Ming Gege or Xiaoyan Jie. I want them to be happy. I want them to be at peace." Lin Ruting smiled and kissed the girl on her wet cheek. "With your smile, I have no need for light," Lin Wuai said as he held his wife. They stared at the looming mountain range which split to form the pass. With his sword in hand, Lin Wuai approached a smooth, flat portion of the rock wall and etched into it a short poem. "There will be those who live and those who die. But those who live without a fight will forever live life in terror or fright. And to those who die, let their names in posterity lie." In time, an army would pass through. He wished that the strong would lift the weak, and that the weak would grow strong. Hey, you've made it to the end. If you like it so far, please subscribe and like. This lets me know I'm on the right path. And if you can't wait for the next installment of Snow at Heaven's Edge, then head on over to Amazon and read the story in its entirety for free if you have Kindle Unlimited. Alternatively, you can check out Dreamweaver and Duel on Mount Taiyuan as well. Both of these stories are done and available for free here on YouTube, Spotify, and Audible. If you want to support me, please consider going to my Ko-fi and being a member. Have a great day.